My name is Christopher Holliday, and I'm a data analyst and economics graduate. Today I'm going to be showing you the statistical software that is Stata. Stata is used by economists, analysts, and other professionals for generating models, statistics, and transforming data. This video is going to assume that you have a basic understanding of data management and you know what a linear regression is. The goal being that if you know what both of these things are, you should be able to follow along. Let's start by opening up Stata, and if you haven't already, pause the video and download the dataset in the description below. Now I've already downloaded the dataset and I've loaded it to the desktop. And the way you load a dataset into Stata the easy way is you double click it and just drag it into the window. And here you can see that Stata has already loaded the dataset with this little information right here. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Press the magnifying glass on top of the table up here, and this will open up our data browser. Here we have the data frame. The data frame is where you're going to be doing a majority of your work. It's most of what you do in Stata is going to revolve around transforming aspects of the data frame or generating statistics and performing operations on the data frame. So up top we have our variables listed, and if we scroll down you can see all our observations that we have. To the left we have our index, and that shows us the number of observations that we have and which index number the observation corresponds to. To the right we have our variables manager, and here we can filter out variables that we don't want to look at. This is particularly useful when you're working with large data sets and you want to look at only a few aspects. Down to the right we can see the properties that each variable has. For example, this variable over here is an integer. This will all make sense a lot later on when you start doing more complex programming and operations with Stata. So don't worry about it right now, because every time you open up a data set that's unfamiliar to you, you're going to be confused by what's going on unless you understand the context. So to give you some of that context, I'm going to explain what this data set is all about. I created this data set to look at the relationship between the maternal mortality ratio of a country and the contraceptive prevalence in that country, trying to see if there's a causal effect between the availability of contraception and the number of maternal deaths in that country. Each observation corresponds to a country, a year in which the observation was taken, the maternal mortality ratio, and if you don't know what that is, that's the number of maternal deaths per 100,000 live births, the contraceptive prevalence percentage, which is the percentage of women who have access to any form of contraception. This is denoted by CPP. The contraceptive prevalence of just modern methods, so the percentage of women who have access to modern methods of contraception in a country. I denoted this by CPP mod. The GDP per capita, and I adjusted this for purchasing power parity, and the number of doctors per 100,000 people, denoted by the docs variable. So let's perform some operations on the data. Here we have our command line, and this is the easiest way to tell Stata to do things. We're going to write in a command, and Stata is going to generate an output. So let's write our first command right now. I'm going to type in mean MMR. Press enter. And here, Stata has generated some information for us based on our command. Right now we have the number of observations that was used in this command. We have our maternal mortality ratios mean, standard error, and a 95% confidence interval. If you don't know what all these numbers mean, don't worry. Stata typically gives you more information than what you're looking for when you're working in the command line. So you can see that this is how we generate statistics, and we can explore our data a bit further. Now, another feature of Stata that is really powerful is its graphics capability, the ability to generate interesting graphics to explore and look at the data. Let's do that right now. Type in scatter MMR docs. Now we can see a scatter plot of the docs variable and the maternal mortality ratio variable plotted in this table. Already we can see a high concentration of a high number of doctors per capita and a low maternal mortality ratio. We have a lot of observations in this right corner. And we can also see a possible negative relationship between the two variables, which makes sense, right? The maternal mortality ratio would likely be lower in a country where there's a lot of doctors due to the availability and modernization of healthcare in that country. This is what I mean by graphics are a good way at exploring the data. You can already hypothesize about relationships that may exist in your data, and you can examine that further by generating models and more graphs and statistics. Now, before I show you our last command, I'm going to show you a very useful trick in Stata that saved me and many others a lot of time, and that is the page up and page down functionality. So if you press page up or page down, once you've pressed paged up, you can access the past commands that you've entered into the command line. This is very useful when you performed a transformation on the data and you want to perform a similar command. Or if you want to go back and perform a similar command, but maybe change the variable. So let's say we wanted to look at the mean or average of the docs variable. You can press enter, and then there you have it. You have the mean, standard error, and number of observations used for the docs variable. Now, for our last command, we're going to generate a model called a linear regression. If you've never heard of a linear regression before, I highly recommend you look up how it's used in statistics and data science. Essentially, it's a way of estimating the relationship between two variables in a data set. Now, this is a very good way of hypothesizing the effect that one variable has on another. So we're going to do that right now. And you can do that very easily in Stata by typing in reg mmr docs. And the reason why we're doing this is because we already hypothesized a negative relationship between our docs variable and the maternal mortality ratio variable. It's a perfect candidate for a linear regression in this case. So let's press enter. Now, here we have a lot of information that Stata outputted. We have, once again, the number of observations used for this regression model. We have a coefficient, a negative value coefficient right here, negative 10.6 of the docs variable, and we have a p greater than t, absolute value of t value right here. This is the important information I want you to look at right now. To interpret this, what this negative 10.6 means is that for every unit increase in the docs variable, or every additional doctor per capita in our model, we can expect to see a negative 10.6 decrease in the maternal mortality ratio of that country at that particular time. And that makes sense for the same reasons we hypothesized that negative relationship between the maternal mortality ratio and doctors per capita. The modernization of healthcare and availability of healthcare options to mothers. And what the 0.000 means over here is that it was unlikely, based on our model, that this relationship was to happen by chance. In fact, it was very, very unlikely, because a low p-value means that there's a very small percentage, based on our model once again, that this happened by chance. And we have a very negative confidence interval. If you don't understand what this all means, don't worry, you can look further into this on your own time. So that's the basics of Stata. I encourage you to try and go back and maybe try different commands on different variables and play around with a dataset or another dataset that you have available. This is the easiest way to understand Stata and get more familiar with the functionality of the program, and as well it's an easier way to sort of understand the dataset that you're working with. Maybe you want to type in mean GDP per capita and see what happens, or maybe you want to run a regression on two other variables, or try a different statistic to generate. In all of these commands, you can type help mmr, you can type help and then the command, and it'll pull up the documentation on that command. It'll tell you what you need to put in the command for it to work, and the different options you can use on the command. The help viewer and the help function will be something you're going to be using a lot when you're working with Stata, because you're going to want to do some more complex operations on the data and generate more complex models specific to the problem that you're working with. So I highly encourage you to play around with the data set, look through the documentation to understand a bit more. And I'll show you more on what Stata can do in a future video.